Welcome to yet another episode of the Family Pictures Podcast. I don't know what's the sign for help. I'm being held captive because that's how I feel by this podcast.
It's called episode 39. You are my captor. Oh shit, the music's still going. My fault.
We got this thing nailed down.
Yeah, we got to keep
40 episodes.
We're keeping that in for sure. And the stupid loop icon was pushed in our new production workflow here. We're just killing it, right?
So we are
episode 39, no mistakes.
39, no mistakes. And we're talking about a film that I did not expect on rewatching to be a complete tearjerker, which is Sidney Lumet's 1988 Running on Empty, which kind of really fits squarely in our whole idea of families on the run for the theme we're kind of exploring right now. And this has a lot of great elements to it. Not only the director, the great Sidney Lumet, who has done so many great films, The Verdict, 12 Angry Men, Dog Day Afternoon, the list goes on. And he kind of comes at this with a 1980s. This is 88, and we're dealing with kind of icons of Gen X on top of that. So you have Plimpton,
which is like on the edge of happening, the iconography of Gen X, right? They're on the leading edge.
Because you have Martha Plimpton and you have the great late River Phoenix, which is a part of why this movie was so hard to watch.
Yeah.
Oddly. One reason, not the only, but a big reason. And you have them in literally 88, 89 at the end of high school, getting ready to go to college. And the unique bit to this film is that River Phoenix's family, actually his mom and dad, have actually been terrorists, domestic terrorists, and they've been on the run for the last, essentially his whole life. And that's where this movie picks up. Right. And I love the way in which Sidney Lumet does it. It's a brilliant film, the way in which he directs it and manages it. But also it's a really great kind of story to frame a family story about, how do you keep this notion of familyness? How do you keep this notion of togetherness and happiness with a family of four, the nuclear family, on the run every 6 to 12 months away from the FBI? It just opens up all sorts of great elements to think about family. And it's the one film, as soon as I saw, the recent one by Paul Thomas Anderson, right? The title always confuses me. It's One Battle After Another,
right?
And it's about them being on the run and also being terrorists. And the immediate kind of parallel analog I thought of is Sidney Lumet's Running on Empty. So in some ways, this is the centerpiece, the kind of beginning of our families on the run. And Michael, what did you make of this one? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was my first watch, so I avoided this film, even though I love Judd Hirsch from Taxi. So the titular family, we have our River Phoenix and his little brother Jonas Avery, who doesn't do much after this, but Christine Lottie and Judd Hirsch are the parents. And, the story of the film, I'll just start with some of the research I found out. A lot of it's pretty interesting. Number one, this film wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Sidney Lumet's celebrity, I learned, right? He basically had in his contract with Lorimar Pictures at the time that he gets one for him, right? He has this one for him. As long as it's under $7 million, you have to make it, you have to green light it. And this was the film he chose, and it definitely would not have happened. And he also, there's this quote I found in an interview where he's like, he says, "I'm a political animal and I'm a depression baby. And if you're a depression baby, you're in politics for the rest of your life." He represented the old left, right? And this is his thinking, that kind of the parents of the boomers, the depression parents' perspective on the new left. And that to me is what I kind of latched onto a lot, is the ideologies of the new left in the 60s and how they were going to change the world. And, this is a 2025 lens versus the most of the things you read are really a 1988 lens, because there's not a lot of writing about this film subsequently out there. And so it was to me, that's what I latched onto the most. And also the one other kind of, I think, interesting production note is it's very much the writer, Naomi Foner. This screenplay was nominated. There was 2 Academy Award nominations out of it. Her screenplay and River Phoenix's performance. And the screenplay is very much based on her reconnecting with a classmate from Columbia University who actually had joined the Weather Underground. And she had actually raised a family of 2 while in hiding for a couple decades. And then the whole idea of the Weather Underground too, it's just one of those like, ooh, who are these like violent kind of radical lefties from the 60s that were gonna end the Vietnam world by blowing up shit? Like that's a
Yeah.
and the funny thing I never knew is like they basically evaded the FBI through their entire existence. Their tradecraft was exceptional, apparently. Unlike the FBI broke the mafia, but they never broke the Weather Underground.
Well,
and it was only their just giving themselves up that led to, for the most part, their arrests.
that's interesting too, because there's mention of that in this story. But the other thing that's interesting when you talk about the old left and Lumet is the film he does. One of the films he does before this, which I think was another big passion
Oh,
project for
Henry,
him,
yeah.
was not only no, it was actually
Daniel, sorry.
where he's
Henry, Daniel,
actually
yeah.
right. It's the E.L. Doctorow book where we're
Mm,
dealing with the son who's kind of dealing with the, execution of his parents, the
right,
Rosenbergs.
right.
And so like that's an interesting kind of parallel that these are 2 of the big kind of films. The Daniel was also kind of it's actually a film I've never seen and I probably
No,
want to
I've
go
never
back
seen
and
it, yeah.
see after this. But like this idea of Lumet's kind of left kind of leanings, but
Mhm.
there's also this obsession with what happens to the kids
Yeah,
as a result of their parents' decisions,
yeah.
political or otherwise. And I really think that that's an interesting parallel between, I had no idea that Lumet, like this is one they had to give him because
Yeah,
it is a strange kind of setting and setup for Hollywood to have the parents basically as terrorists who have kind of bombed a munitions lab at UMass, I guess, in this movie. But I guess
right, napalm, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
and the
based
real ones,
a little bit on the real bombing of, Sterling Hall in 1970, which hosted an Army Mathematics Research Center at the time, and there was a postdoc in physics that was killed there along with 3 others that were injured, and I actually read quickly the Wikipedia article about them, and 3 out of the 4 people that participated in that bombing were captured. None of them spent time in jail for more than 5 years, which was really kind of amazing to me. And one of them, to this day, has never been seen again. He went to Toronto and kind of his, poof, off the map, probably maybe alive or not alive at this point. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me, like this discourse with the Weather Underground and how these moments are part of history that's in a lot of ways forgotten to popular culture. I saw one point, there was an attempt not too long ago for someone to try to produce a film about the Weather Underground, and it just hasn't picked up traction. And this is part of it, reminds me of what Lumet said in that interview. I think it was in Vanity Fair in 1980 at the time. It's like the Lorimar just kept trying to neuter the film. It's 1988. This is the like Michael J. Fox, rah rah. Let's make movies that are fun about capitalism,
exactly.
kind of time. And he's just like, no. And so it's like they kept saying, that's a little too much. That's a little too political. It's a little too much. And that's when he had to like pull his card out and say, like, we're doing this as long as I keep it under 7 million.
Yeah. And I mean, and the fact is, to his credit, the way in which they deal with the politics in this film, and we could talk about it, right? It is a bit like, you see it through the TV, you see it through the newspaper, right? You see it through other people's eyes, like the parents, ultimately the dad. But like in terms of the family, like they're a family who's just kind of learned to live this way. And,
Yeah.
the father does come out and have his moments where he talks about it. And we talked a little bit about Judd Hirsch with the kind of rock and roll versus classical, and it breaks
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
some of those. But in
Yeah.
general, you're not. It's not like Trotsky and his his groups coming in, right? Like there is this sense of this family in the '80s and these whole setup like you could really identify with. And I think in that way, I can't believe Laura Marr didn't see this. Like this is just a really good kind of setup. Like it's one of those really good plots. Like I always thought that about Escape from New York. Escape from New York, greatest plot in the world.
Mm.
Manhattan prison, Manhattan Island becomes a prison. How can you beat it? Right? Same with this. Your parents are terrorists and you have to kind of go from school to school. And what does
Yeah.
that mean for the family? Like, I
But
think it's a great
But Jim,
plot.
this is the 80s. The plot, if it was an 80s movie, would have ended up with the family like actually in some sort of set piece with explosions and gunfire,
They would have been in Vietnam winning.
Yeah,
Like, we're winning Vietnam. We've
well, I
gone
mean,
back.
there is one other, like, in terms of production note that really kind of stood out to me. In the writer of the Vanity Fair article from 1988, which was interestingly titled "Weather Overground." He talked about he actually interviewed members of the Weather Underground back in 1975, and they he and one other writer that were allowed to do this interview were hooded and shoved in a van. And in the van ride, they're hearing over the radio. It happened to coincide with the fall of Saigon, which had just happened hours earlier. And in the way he ends his article is so interesting to me, which is a big part of, I think, the identity of this film that Lumet, I think, successfully talks about is like, they didn't celebrate, like, because the war's over with the fall of Saigon, and you would think like the Weather Underground in this moment would be high-fiving one another. It's like we were part of making that happen. But the Ron Rosenblum's quote was the final line of his article says, "The war was over, but for them, life during wartime wasn't going to come to an end." And that's ultimately, I think, the thing that I kind of latched onto is this identity of ideology that Judd Hirsch's character mostly represents, even though his performance isn't my favorite. I mean, I love him from Taxi, and his comedic timing is brilliant, but his ability to play a dramatic character, I think, is kind of a little wobbly at times. It's a bit of a caricature, even though I think the words in the story are wonderful, as you're describing. But regardless of that, that idea, you're going to keep the tension of living in the 60s moment. And what does that mean? And trying to relive it. And there's this great scene with this guy who's still really living it, who's the character Gus, who tries to entreat them into let's do it again. Let's do a bank robbery, which very much must have been inspired by the actual 1981 Brinks bank robbery, where you have like former Weather Undergrounders and former Black Panthers that are united to like, let's keep this alive, and it's
It really
1981 and
armed
they're trying to,
robbery.
yeah, let's kill some cops, man. So
Well, that guy
yeah.
who comes, Gus, is interesting. Production note: LM Kit Carson is his name, and he
Mm.
actually co-wrote with Sam Shepard Paris, Texas.
Oh,
And
okay.
he was married to Karen Black, and their kid, Hunter Carson, was the child actor in Paris, Texas. One of my great favorite films of all time.
Mm.
Good family movie, actually, if
Oh,
we
yeah.
do come to it. But anyway, that's a fun fact about him. He was kind of a nut actor slash director slash writer, and he had a crazy career. But this is one of his, I think, most memorable acting roles. And then obviously co-writing Paris, Texas. Forget.
Yeah. So if we kind of get into the story, that there is the escape that the film starts with, but to me, the thing that stood out post escape is when they're setting up, home, the next home, right? Their home life is rebuilding. And there's what's so great is there's multiple family meals. And there's this family meal that happens after Danny, who is now Michael, his new name is Michael.
Yeah.
And there's this moment of interrogation that happens. So family conversation isn't, like, how was your day? How was your first day of school? Did you make any friends? is there, or what are the negative influences I'm worried about my kids joining that would be normally possibly part of like family conversation of like, oh gosh, I hope they're not drinking too much, or at least that's maybe what the parents would talk about. No, it's all about, it's like, are you in peril? Are you putting us in peril? And this comes out as the Artie character is kind of interrogating Danny about what's my name, and I couldn't, it made me in a weird way think of Walter White, in the famous scene. It's like, my name. Tell me my name. You're goddamn right I am. And that's the Judd Hirsch performance a little bit, but it's this idea of like, you're bullying your children into being this liar, which is really odd.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that scene comes off of him just learning that his mom had died of cancer. And so like part of that was his aggression in general at like the situation he's in and he finds himself with. But I actually, that is a moment for sure. And I like your reading about keeping them kind of, this militant sense that they're always in it. But the parts about this movie that struck me the most were the moments, I'll say it. So right after they get picked up, which is not get picked up, they go on the run. So they're in Florida City somewhere. The feds come,
I love the bumbling
River
feds.
Phoenix, figures it out quickly, figures out to get his brother out of the car, and then they meet the parents and they're off. And as they leave, they set up for a night before they find their new house or for a day in a hotel or a motel. And in that motel, the mother, Christine, played by Christine Lofty. What's her name in the movie? Is it
Annie?
Annie. So she's actually changing their hair color.
Oh,
she's
the peroxide jobs. Yeah.
And then River Phoenix goes in there, Danny, and he basically like looks at her and she looks at him and like and they hug and there's just this sense of like, the trials, whatever that trial is for whatever that family, not necessarily theirs, but between them at that moment, there was a scene where I was like, that is so touching. This family just had to uproot. They're in the middle. The kid doesn't know who he is, but he still takes that moment to kind of like connect and love his mom, who also, she knows what she's doing to him. That was like the first of many times I burst out into tears while watching this. And so like, it was a very different watch for me. I was like, why am I getting so upset? Like maybe I have something going on. I have to go see a doctor.
Wow. Sensitive Jim Groom,
Jim Groom, because the great sensitive River Phoenix, he plays it beautifully.
River Phoenix is remarkable.
That connection there between them. At that moment when, these kids could be like, fuck you, mom, fuck you, dad, I'm out, this is bullshit. To your point, they're in it because there's a military sensibility that the dad brings. But then they're also in it because as a family, there's a lot of love. There's a lot of laughter. The younger brother is kind of the comic. Whereas maybe that, the older brother is a bit of the kind of, sensitive artist. But it pulls it off really well. Whereas I kind of got sucked into this idea of, my own sense of family and my idea of my kids now. I got a daughter looking at a college.
Tim,
I got my son leaving. Exactly. Like, I was kind of like, luckily I'm not a terrorist. So my kids don't have that to bear.
I don't know. You're on the run in Italy from all I can see.
Let's not give any geolocations.
And you did recently write about that, the strangeness of being in that space, and so I can hear that coming through here, and I definitely agree. I mean, I was more emotionally connected to the Martha Plimpton and River Phoenix performance together because at the time of this film, number one, this is literally 5 years before River Phoenix dies, because he dies in 93. Exactly. This film comes out in 1988. And at this moment, Martha Plimpton and River Phoenix are actually dating in real life, and they're literally falling in love in real time in front of our faces. I mean, they had met on the Mosquito Coast and started dating when they were incredibly young, like 15, 16. both of them, in very formative years. And their intimacy is really endearing. In particular, the way that Martha Plimpton's character Lorna is interrogating Danny's character, River Phoenix, reflects some of real life that's so heartbreaking because he was really struggling with, drug and alcohol abuse. And she talks in later interviews in life about like their fights and trying to bully him out of that space and failing. And that's how they break up, I think,
Yeah.
within a couple of years of this film. And I feel like this was like a proxy in a weird way. Her interrogation of him and his lying to her and not being truthful or not revealing who he really is, because that's what he has to hide in this character's lifestyle of, I'm not really Michael. I'm actually, Danny Pope, the son of these two Weather Underground types.
I
She's trying to
also
bully
wonder
him too. Yeah, go
But
ahead.
I also wonder here, like Phoenix, River Phoenix's own childhood, according
Yeah,
to his own biography, family moved across country. Mom was a hippie, Jew from New York. Like there was a lot of like
yeah,
overlapping elements to his own story with his brothers and sisters and what he did, and like this. So I wonder what he thought about this role as he walked into it, and as
yeah,
part of playing his own moment, like that kind of his own. He's just amazing in this
yeah,
role,
yeah. I mean,
and
so
like
is
you
Martha
can feel
Plimpton to me. I think so. I think
absolutely
like,
she's great too. But I
yeah,
mean, you get the sense that he's the one who's got to kind of communicate that relationship with the family,
right.
that break away, and he does it
Yeah, there's a
wonderfully. And I
lot
wonder
on
how much his
him.
own biography informs some of that.
Yeah. And so, so we have this
Not to take anything away from Martha Plimpton, Michael. I know you're very jealous over her performance. I'm not trying to downgrade it.
what?
Martha Plimpton's performance.
I don't think you're trying to downgrade it. I think
I
she's
just
killing
wanted
it.
to let you know as much.
Okay, so what are you, not a Goonies fan or something? What the fuck are you talking about here? I don't get this. Where are you?
Martha
What?
Plimpton always came off as the really smart 80s kid,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? Who was smarter than her time, which sometimes as a younger 80s kid, I didn't necessarily love that much.
Oh, is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
She made you jealous. Okay, I get it.
She was in the honors classes and I wasn't.
I mean, so the other thing so we have this. I mean, there's a lot of setting up that goes on. I mean, they're going back to we spend a lot of time with Danny entering school and the machinations of what it's like to be a new kid, and he gets adopted by this music teacher who happens to be Annie's father, and that's actually how he meets Annie in the first place. Oh, sorry, Lorna. Annie's his mother. Lorna. He gets adopted by this music teacher that sees a shine in him, and he plays the piano very well. And it's like everybody's like, "Who's your teacher?" And it's like, I picked it up on my own, but we later learn it's actually his mother, which is pretty cool. But one of the things that soon happens is the visit. I almost feel like it's worth just jumping right into how Gus comes for a visit, right? So they've kind of they're settling into their new family life, and things seem to be going pretty well. We have Artie, who's not too keen on his son's enjoyment of classical music. He sees it as this. I love these quotes. It's like he's getting seduced by this bourgeois crap, fucking chamber music and decadent. This is my favorite quote, decadent, white-skinned, privileged crap. And so it's just like unhinged.
Yeah, he's unhinged, which I like his character when he gets
me
like
too.
that,
I really do too. It's
he's trying to communicate to his kids like he did what he did for something.
right.
And I'm sure the price they're paying is significant, as we know.
But
But
he
his
has
rants are good.
yeah. What's that?
His rants are good.
No, his rants are good, and his rant comes out, and there's this. So they've each found jobs at this point as well. Artie is a line cook, and Annie's found a job as a receptionist in a clinic, or just a doctor's office, like a typical family doctor's office. And she's at the doctor's office, and there's this strange dude sitting in the waiting room next to this normal person who seems to be a client. And it turns out to be Gus, former Gus, who's the man of her life from the past. And the way he's presented is really great, because he shows up and they embrace and like, oh, remember the good old days. And then his character, and this idea of, what do the 60s represent as what they thought of family in that moment versus what did the 80s produce of these 60s, these boomers that became, normal parents with children. And this idea of, did she cop out, or is it a cop out? And he does this in a few ways. So Gus enters the house, and he's like entreating Annie so hard. He's like literally hitting on her. And there's this moment where he's like rubbing her feet, and we both like we both went Pulp Fiction instantly.
Yeah, I wonder, is this the scene where, Tarantino's seeing this movie saying like, yeah, if I walked in, that would be cheating, right?
Yeah.
And there would be and if I was a gangster, that dude would be dead. So
and
like,
Antoine should have better fucking known better.
Exactly. I thought of the same thing when he started giving the foot massage, and I saw that it was already in the notes. I was like, how funny.
Yeah, and it's this really intimate moment between this former person, and he's literally saying like, what are you doing, Annie? What are you doing with this bullshit Norman Rockwell family? Just like, you need to toss this, and you need to come back to me. And to me, this is Lumet interrogating that moment as not about really ideologically aligned with something that is meaningful and trying to make a difference. It's about lust, because he's comparing his lust for her to his lust to bring back the ideology of the 60s and continue it well into the 80s, well past it's overbaked at this point.
That's a good reading. And also it suggests like, part of that scene is, you're kind of not who you were, right? When I saw you on the corner with those whatever earrings, and the whole idea is, what was it about? And 20 years later, can it be about the same thing? So what happens soon after Gus, soon after the dad, Artie, walks in on them is, Gus kind of gets up and said, I came here, I want to have something to talk to you about. And then you hear them talking outside, and then Artie gets upset.
Yep.
And he calls out the whole family, first his wife, but then the whole family. And he, basically says that Gus has kind of propositioned him in order to pay off the debt he owes to the political group, essentially that they're going to do a bank robbery together.
Right.
And an armed robbery. And so that's one of the most memorable scenes of the films is when Artie grabs the guns and he says, get the boys down, bring the boys down. And like you said, one of them's always in the underwear.
The younger brother, Jonas, Harry is just hanging out in his underwear. He belongs in slums of Beverly Hills. It's like, let me sit with those two guys. I'm perfect. I align perfectly with those two brothers.
Slums of the Beverly Hills in this, wasn't there?
Exactly,
There was some overlap between them.
Definitely.
But anyway, he comes out and he shows them the guns, because he rifles through his trunk, brings out the guns, and he says to his kids, this is not what we're about. Right? This is not. And it's a great scene. And it's a great kind of, to your reading of Lumet and what he's doing, he's kind of trying to bring that kind of political stance they had and this sense of moral, like they took a moral stance, for better or for worse, what happened, and not losing sight of that moral stance and why they're doing what they are doing and who they are. That was a kind of real point where they're not a Norman Rockwell family, right? Like they are still a family, like completely driven by ideals of what this world can be versus what it is. And I think that's part of the point. And Gus kind of seems to have completely checked out of that, right? He's just living his bachelor life, right?
Yeah, and it's a contrast though in the evolution of those ideals. This is where I think Lumet is still trying to speak to his affection for the liberalness, because he where Gus is deriding the Artie character's efforts to, like, support a community that's preventing, a dumping of toxic waste, or working with the food co-op, or there's a couple others that Gus kind of just like dismisses as pshaw. That's not real change, which is actually, that is real change. That is actually helping people prevent bad things from happening. And that's where Artie's heart is now. And Artie's efforts are in being a community organizer, if you will, and not trying to blow shit up anymore. But Gus is like, that's bullshit. It's a war, man.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of ran into it. Just suddenly made me think of like that famous, and literally it was released in 1988, the same year, this parodying of hippies, and with the music compilation called Freedom Rock. Remember the good old days, man? War, protests, going to jail. This was a thing, a commercial that's emblazoned in my mind, and it's like, Lord, I'm a rambling. And there's these songs that were the kind of soundtrack of the '60s that were compiled into these records, the way that they used to sell us music as compilations when they still could before the internet. And they'd say, "Hey man, is that Freedom Rock? Turn it up, man." And it's this contrast, because Gus is a parody in a sense right now at this point. And that's what's so
And
interesting.
he has
to
a
me.
California State University of something shirt on. I don't know what, but I really would
I
love
missed
to know.
that. Yeah.
But the other thing too, to get to that point you're making, because I'm not just making vapid points about his wardrobe, is there's a broader sense too about this push from the 60s to where we are now. And Thomas Pynchon, who wrote One Battle After Another, no, he didn't write One Battle After Another. He inspired Anderson to write One Battle After Another.
Okay.
Anderson wanted to redo Vinland, but he said he just couldn't. And Vinland takes place in the 80s. And it basically is tracking how far the 60 hippies have come in that 20 years during the 80s, and was talking about like basically that shift in America from the 60s to the 80s. And even with Inherent Vice, he does it in the 2010s, talking about that loss of that political spirit, that loss of that kind of moment where, democracy was kind of, being sold out essentially to the corporations, to the political corrupt, all that. And supposedly, Pynchon's whole career is like 30 or 40 years of tracking America's slipping through consumerism into kind of a state we have now, which is a little bit of authoritarian, rich billionaire assholes ruling the country.
Yeah.
Like, he's kind of documenting that. And I think that's why, One Battle After Another for me strikes as Anderson's really kind of powerful kind of look at Pynchon, because I think it's a kind of on that spectrum of seeing from the 60s how far away we get. And your point about the commercializing of 60s, even in the 80s, right? Us growing up in the 80s, all we heard about was the 60s.
Right.
The 60s
and all we heard,
everything.
Their music was like so culture dominant, even though the 80s had its popular music that was incredibly successful and is now adored, which is really ironic at the time, because you were, as a high school student, often positioned as like, did you love the music of your parents in the 60s and that, so much of it anti-war music, or were you like a poser who is into the 80s pop music? And then of course there are the genres that existed that kind of were the modern, opposition of post-punk and 80s kind of punk music that was operating in Washington DC and California and stuff like that. That was very fringe, but the dominant culture was really like, are you 80s pop or are you like a 60s? Like, are you stuck back in the 60s?
Yeah,
that was more the dominant culture, is what I'm trying to say in comparison.
No, totally. And it's funny how now that people kind of like some of the 80s new wave, punk, whatever, the 80s kids are kind of like, really? Like, you guys actually like that? Like, we always no one liked it. Everybody was supposed to like, anywhere from the Beatles up to the Rolling Stones, up to the
Yeah,
Birds or whatever. This stuff's not good. We've been told that
yeah,
for decades. Your shit is not
yeah.
good. No one makes good music with synthesizers. So, like, it's interesting how even that kind of element of the 80s, and as you brought up, this kind of emergence of Gen X, that I think this movie, which is unassuming, does a
Yeah.
really good job of.
Yeah, and so that comes up through this, like, so after Gus leaves the scene and Artie walks away from the scene, for a moment, and Annie rejects him, and it's great how she rejects him because she is, like, forked tongue in a single line. She says, 'cause, he's entreating her to come with him and, toss her family, and she says, "I wish I could, now get out." So she's clearly not aligned anymore, but at the same time aligned. And it's this, conundrum that she exists in. So, and then Artie comes home, because he has walked away, and he comes home drunk singing Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman.
And there's this weird scene of him like basically spitting up. I'm his real name. I don't even remember what his. Oh. I'm Artie. I'm Arthur Pope, even though that's not his name at this moment. And he's like talking about his parents and his this. It's a bit about Jewish identity as well, and not being able to identify with that, because he's not allowed to in his own mind, and there's this losing of identity he's focused on. But that doesn't really matter in my mind, because what matters is what happens next, because um, we have this two portraits of family that come up through the Martha Plimpton character, as Lorna, and Danny, who's Michael at this moment. They have a date, and their relationship is very much about existing in the woods, and the woods and the wild. I don't quite know what to make of it, but there's three, kind of very important moments in their relationship, and all of them happen in the woods. And this first one is wonderful because
It's like in between space between the families, like they're
yeah,
outside, right? Where you
right.
go with that person, to converge outside the family space.
Yeah, and that's a good way. I really, yeah, like that
Thank
interpretation.
you.
It's
I work hard for this. You're
you
not
do.
the only one doing things. I'm doing
On
things.
Though you look at our production notes, and if we could track the number of words written by me versus Jim Groom, we might quibble on that, but it's okay because Jim is the one who actually can articulate things well, where I'm just like
Yeah, right.
yammering up and down across my notes here. Anyway, so in the quote unquote woods, it's wonderful because Lorna is like a angsty suburban kid who doesn't want to walk or go on a hike. I thought we were just going to hang out, and it's really great. So
Yeah.
she's this portrait of like proto Gen X angst in this moment, because she's doing two things at the same time. She's interrogating Danny's character, River Phoenix, about like, who are you? What are you doing? But she's also explaining how she struggles in a very kind of John Hughesian way about what's wrong with her family, right? Because it's this very privileged family, and it might as well be like Molly Ringwald complaining at this moment, from
That
the
is
Breakfast Club.
brilliant. That is brilliant because it's as if Sidney Lumet took those movies and said, "I'm going to take that." And I know he didn't write it, but let's just
Yeah.
say, or the writer of this, Naomi, what's her last name?
It's Naomi Foner.
Phoner. So she took it and said, "I'm going to do basically a used film or build part of it, and then
Yeah.
the other half is going to be this serious kind of family that's on the run and has no real link to a used film, because there is that element there with Martha Plimpton. You're so
Yeah.
right. Like, she plays that role brilliantly, even down to the details of her room.
Yeah, yeah, she's got the Pretty in Pink's, it's no, not Pretty in Pink, like, yeah, Pretty in Pink. No, it's more the Molly Ringwald character from Breakfast Club. How you would imagine she has all these like beautiful hats adorning her wall, but right next to it is a Bob Marley poster, which
Totally.
the Molly Ringwald character would not necessarily have, or maybe she did, trying to pose as I'm super cool and a thinker. And she is, and she's super smart. And what's so great is that she she thinks of her family as too nice, and that's the phrasing she uses. Her family is, picture perfect, and and this is the best quote she uses to describe it. They see what they want to see and they block everything else out. And this is that other interrogation of the idealism of the 60s being rejected, right? I think by Lumet, like this idea of or maybe we should actually more attribute it to Foner, honestly.
Yeah.
This idea that what happened to all that angst and all that we're going to change the world, and instead let's host little concerts in our living room with fancy, cakes and classical ensembles performing, and everybody else is fine, aren't they? They're
Yeah.
fine. And this is what she's really pushing up against. And then the funny thing is, but compared to, the Danny character, River Phoenix's character is like, I'm still living in the 60s. You have to realize this shit sucks. So that sounds nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's longing for just that kind of stability and
Yeah.
that sense of, I could actually have a piano to play. And, I can think about something beyond where my next kind of address is going to be. I could think about college or something, because that's really the key moment after they've done their removal from their last city is, Danny's getting old enough now, or Michael, however you want to say it, where he's thinking about college. He must be in his junior or senior year, actually senior year.
Yeah.
And like he's being kind of pushed, hey, are you going to graduate? And I think River Phoenix would have actually been a senior or near a senior in high school when he's making this, which is very interesting. And he's very believable in that. And so the next question that comes up is, if he leaves, what does that mean for the family? Like this whole removal of River Phoenix now from the family unit opens up a whole series of kind of questions and problems and really deep issues for this family that just assumed they would always be together, given the kind of struggle has made them super tight and made them a kind of super powerful family, in that they've resisted the consumerism, they've resisted the money, they've remained focused on who they are and what they want. But, even Christine Lofty says at some point, I had done everything I could not to think about this, the idea of him leaving. And yet that's the kind of cloud looming over the whole film for the second half.
So not to bring up, well, I have to, because I want to bring up the mafia again, because it makes me think of The Godfather, where you have Michael. This isn't the what I wanted for you, Senator, maybe, and that's where like the Annie mother character, she's like, I don't want this for my son. Whereas, we have Artie's like, no, he's part of the family. He's going to be a henchman. You got to rise the ranks. It's like, this is just business. It's not personal. You take the gun, you shoot the people you're supposed to shoot. Like this is what Artie represents. He represents the unit as a control system of, this is a style of family that we've crafted here. You must stick with it. Where Annie is obviously starting to question it, or maybe is always questioning it. I mean, I think the Gus character shows us that Annie has never been fully aligned with Artie. And there's just one blog post I was reading about these two people that were talking about this. And it's great because, Annie being with Artie was probably in the 60s kind of a middle finger to her parents, right? Because she has incredibly wealthy parents. We learn towards the end of this film, they're incredibly cultured, wealthy parents that live in New York, and they sponsor Juilliard students to this day. And she probably showed up with Artie in the 60s and is like, see, this is my Bolshevik boyfriend,
Exactly.
It's like, fuck you,
There is definitely a piece of that, even to the great, another, ball-worthy scene where I just couldn't keep my eyes dry, is when, Annie meets with her dad. And so there's that scene where all of the machinations are going in place,
But wait, hold that one off, because that's important, because we have the other family portrait, the other ideal, right? So Lorna gets herself invited to dinner, and for the birthday dinner of Annie. All right, Annie. She's 40, turning 40 something, and the filming of this is incredible. This is basically a single take wide shot, this entire scene, which is kind of nuts. So it's unfolds in front of you like a scene in a play. You get to absorb everything, and it's the kitchen and the table and the this is a scene where, you know, it's this fantasy. I describe it as like this like ideal of this is what 60s life done
Yeah.
well post in the 80s would be like. Martha Plimpton, I'm sorry, Lorna walks in, it's Lorna, and she's immediately saying, "How can I help?" Right? And then, you know, they all have their really cute homemade birthday trinkets. There's nothing like from a Target or from a Walmart that like reeks of commercialism. Everything's handmade, homemade, gifts are homemade or found. That's the rule in the household. Um, and everybody's satisfied with those gifts, right? Those are completely compelling. And then the cream of this cake of a fantasy is the James Taylor music. And we have I See Fire and Rain playing as they're washing the dishes. Everybody's enjoying washing the dishes, and and it turns into this hippie dance party to I See Fire and Rain,
Yeah.
which is the I always thought I would see you again is the name that what I chose for the name of this episode. That's a quote from that song, which evokes the ultimate, you know, tension in this film is like if River Phoenix leaves, they're never going to see him again. But this is this moment before that question has to really be confronted. Wow, look at what could have been.
Yeah, exactly. And I was always kind of disappointed that it was a James Taylor song because based on the title of the movie, I was like, it's got to be a Jackson Brown song.
Mm.
Running on empty, still the one. But no,
No.
I felt that was a little bit of a ripoff. The James Taylor song works better though.
Yeah, it does.
And it actually is another scene, that whole family birthday when they start doing the dishes and then they start dancing. That another cry moment for me. And the cry moment is interesting too because it's got, you know, the parents and the younger son starting to dance as they're
Yep.
kind of they were dancing like mom was dancing with Michael or River Phoenix, and you know dad was dancing with the girlfriend Lorna, and then the son comes in and they kind of recombine so that it's
Yeah.
father, mother, and younger son, and River and Martha Plimpton or Lorna. And in fact, beautifully, Sidney Lumet cuts the screen in half,
Yeah.
showing that separation happening and then showing you in that scene, you know, the future of what's going to happen and also the tension between, you know, how that family unit's going to change with the loss of him, but also how it's necessary for him to leave. And that whole idea of should the sins of the fathers and the mothers, you know, be delivered upon the kids too, and for how long? And those are the questions he was asking with Daniel, right? With the Rosenbergs and
Yeah.
that whole kind of the sins of the parents. And it's obviously very much on his mind here. And that's an interesting, obviously, theme that Lumet wants to explore. Hence, you know, green lighting this film, like you said, even though they didn't want it, is that whole idea of generational responsibility, right?
Yeah.
At what point are we responsible for what's happened before? And, you know, maybe not being responsible is its own problem too, right? Like not like turning your back totally on that, like River Phoenix seems to be, opens up some interesting questions too about the 80s and Gen X and all that. And we could talk about that with the father piece. But like, yeah, there's a lot going on in that scene. And it on rewatching the film again, that is the central scene of the movie. That whole moment.
Absolutely is. And I like that discussion that you're just bringing up there that it makes me think of is like, where does responsibility lie within a child for their actions in the context of their parents? You know, it makes me think as a parent, it's like when you have like your kids hanging out with other kids and you're like, man, that kid's an asshole. Like he's destructive and he's doing all this. And you always like, well, those parents are, you tread lightly when it comes to other parents' upbringing of their own children, but it's something we always think about as parents. It's like that kid is that way because of their parents. But at what time, at what point, you know, inevitably that child is maybe still going to be an asshole and they're a young adult or they're an older teenager and they start to be responsible for their own actions. And I think that's what you're bringing up here. Because River Phoenix's character, Danny, is on the cusp of being responsible for the choices he makes. and he will be complicit in the action of his parents if he continues, because he's a young adult. He's a proto-adult, and proto-adults are people we start to assign, responsibility. We literally will send them to jail, or we'll try them as adults if they commit murder, even if their brains are not fully formed teenage brains.
Yeah. Well, it also, I mean, if we're thinking about this in that generational question, right? One of the things that opens up is River Phoenix wants to study classical music,
Yeah.
go to Juilliard, join basically the ranks of his wealthy grandparents, and kind of, probably to his father's, umbrage, basically become bourgeois. And so there's also that idea of these 80 kids being like, fuck you, 60s. I want some money. I want some comfort. I don't want to deal with all your bullshit that ultimately, as a generation, boomers, you're going to sell us down the river anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, there is that moment. And I'm wondering, like, for me, it's only in thinking and talking this through with you, like, River Phoenix's decision to leave is also like a decision to kind of get on board with the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Like, get on board with a very different mentality, even if as a sentimental kid, he'll do different things. And his girlfriend, Lorna, has very different ideas. So there's a lot you could argue away from it. But symbolically, looking at what that leave means, it's interesting.
Yeah. Same thing, like thinking this, it's like the Martha Plimpton character represents the Gen X that will be in the next decade, right? This rejection of commercialism, commodity, and the boomers accepting of that. Whereas the River Phoenix represents the Gen X of like 25 years later. It's like, wait. No, I want to sell out too, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
I am. This idea of like, don't be a poser is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, because I lived it, right? I mean, that's the other thing. Like, he knew early on.
Right. And so we do, and I mean, I don't know if you want to jump to this now, but this is summarized in that kind of final not reconciliation, but the Annie confronting her father.
I mean, her dad essentially says that, and I will go to that because I think that's right. But I think the other piece that you brought up earlier while we were talking before we get on the podcast is, there's a scene in that split dance scene, that central scene, where not only the parents are dancing with the younger son and River Phoenix and Martha Plimpton are dancing.
Oh, yeah.
But there's that scene where River Phoenix essentially falls into Martha Plimpton, and they kind of start dancing. And there's a sense of both acting and not acting.
Yeah.
And, in some of my research that people think I don't do, but let me be clear here, I do. Sidney Lumet was super impressed with how, intensely River Phoenix fought for the motivations of his character and what he thought his character should and shouldn't do and would or wouldn't do, even to the point that he was facing off with Sidney Lumet and with the writer. And I don't think he was he was a prima donna or saying this is not, but he was so invested seemingly. And Sidney Lumet comments about this in Making Movies, which is a book I'm actually reading now and I freaking love. So if you haven't read it, please check it out. But he basically talks about the idea that, River Phoenix was pretty much, standing up and saying, this is what this, and he was convincing, and he convinced both the writer and the director that, for example, like, he wouldn't switch and pretend he wasn't playing, music as a piano, as an artist. He would keep playing. Like, his character would insist that he wasn't embarrassed about playing the music. And then there was another time when he switches from the classical to a kind of jazzy thing to hide what he's doing. And in both scenes, both the director and the writer kind of gave in, and they said, "Yeah, we think you're right." It's interesting, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to me, River Phoenix, he's the actor that I think most people point to. It's like he might have been like a Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, he is one of those really big what ifs.
I think without question he would have been.
Yeah, performer. Those two would have been jockeying for Scorsese films. And
I think he would have outdone him. I think he would have been better.
Yeah. And so there was a recent interview, Plimpton, and so that moment, because we've already, I've learned that they were actually, together as a couple, and they're literally falling in love, and the way they fall into, you describe how Phoenix falls into
That's
Plimpton's
great.
character, and this is the first real contact, like physical contact, between these two. They've gone on their quote unquote date in the woods where they're walking around, and they have affection for one another. And teenage affection is so interesting to me, and how, contact with someone that you like is so electrifying, because it's so new, and it's so different from all the contact you've had with your parents, which is a different sort of affection, but it's simply physical affection. It's equally important, but obviously very different. And Plimpton talks about, to this day, she did a recent interview actually, and she says we were each other's first love, and that relationship never really goes away. You can't ever let something like that go. It's just too important and too altering. And it's true. Like that first love,
Yeah.
your teenage, it's so altering, because it's a changing of your view of the world, as a teenager.
That whole idea of the formative years, and
Yeah.
we all have them. We all have those people we point to and those things that mattered. And it's interesting to see theirs play out a little bit on film, right? Like
Mhm.
that must be a
Yeah.
super interesting piece, as being part of Hollywood and being part of
Yeah.
that as your career is, you obviously read them as characters in this story by, Lament, but then you also read them as people who are growing up. And the sad piece always about watching, River Phoenix at any point of his growing up as film is that we know it has a definitive end. And it's just sad because he's a
Yeah.
talent. And as you grow up with an actor and you identify with them over the course of what would be 10 or 12 years of watching him, and then it ends. And I can tell you exactly where I was when I found out that he died of the vapor room. I was at UCLA working at AVS, and I heard that story and I was like, really?
Yeah.
He's my age. I was like, really? He's dead?
Yeah.
And like, it's just, that was like a moment. Like, you can talk about a lot of different people who die, but like for me, that's definitely like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like he's early 20s.
Yeah.
He's my generation. He's already reached a stardom that others could just imagine or dream about, and he's gone. I mean, that
And he
was
and he dies
nuts.
in front of people that were also like, it's right in front of Johnny Depp and a couple other actors
His
and
brother.
actresses. Yeah, and it's, Joaquin, and it's just, it's heartbreaking. And it's, what's interesting is that the kind of the final, I think, important family scene is this setup between the Annie character and her father, played by Stephen Hill, who's the wonderful TV actor that was on Law and Order forever, a decade. And his performance is also remarkable. Like, I think because Martha Plimpton and River Phoenix kind of overwhelmed this film. This Christine Lati, and this scene with Stephen Hill is so affecting. And the setup is simply, she's got to go into the city, because this film is taking place in like the outskirts of upstate New York, New Jersey. We don't quite know, but it's
Which is
they're still connected to New York. And so she goes into the city to meet a dentist, that's still an affiliate of the cause, if you will. And he offers her cash, but her real intention, her teeth are fine, is she wants to set up uh, to set up a conversation with her father, because he's part of, connected to that, and can make that happen, and makes a lunch date, because ultimately her goal is to approach her father, not for reconciliation to justify her past, but it's to ask him to consider accepting Danny into their family, the bourgeois household, as you described it, that
yeah.
ironically he'd be going into. And the idea is, this conversation as it unfolds, number one, she shows up and he's just like shocked, because he doesn't know it's a lunch date with his daughter.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's shocked, and on top of that, he's just listening, seeing her quiet, and then obviously they deal with all the kind of like, how could you do this to me? 14 years not seeing your
Yeah.
kid. Do you have any idea what that does to you? Not being able to see your kid for 14 years, and
Yeah.
that's the great irony, is because we know that she's actually going to go through the same thing by
Right.
asking her dad to take her son, who she won't be able to see essentially after he leaves because the FBI will be following him. They'll basically be cut off. He's essentially his River Phoenix leaving the family, or Michael leaving the family, means essentially he will not be able to see his family. And that's another part of the tension of this film that I think is so great, just as a story, is like the real stakes of breaking away from your family. Like for
Mhm.
most, it's no stakes. You can go back at any point, and that kind of loss you feel as a parent is mitigated by the fact that they can come back and whatever. And like it's a little bit more like, gradual. Whereas
Right.
this one, it's like as soon as he leaves, it's over. And that's a real powerful moment. And it's also when you realize that, River Phoenix has essentially, without telling his parents, decide that I do want a different lifestyle and not necessarily to become, the bourgeois capitalist that his granddad is, but to not keep on the charade of running from town to town and pretending to be someone he's not. He's over it.
And at the same moment, Annie has admitted this too. She's done. She's not allowed to be done, but in this conversation, she confesses, "I'm done." And as soon as, her younger son, Harry, doesn't need her anymore, I put that in air quotes for if this is the sound only people, um, she's going to turn herself in. So she's not confessed this to Artie, but she's confessing this to her father that, I need a new life as well. Like, and so this is where the binding between mother and son is very clear. Like they are at a crossroads, and he is her proxy for making this decision. Like Gus was like kind of a shoulder push, if you will, but it's really her son that's making her realize this is an untenable life. And Artie would want the roller coaster to continue because he's still in the throes of trying to make a difference. And he thinks that this family unit is his support system to still try to make a difference, even though it's has all these obvious frayed edges. But she's done.
Yeah.
She's emotionally tired, and the way she steps away, and this is in high compliment to Stephen Hill, the way he responds, finally, he like emotionally cracks to when his daughter
So
says goodbye. It's incredible performance.
it's
I mean,
incredible.
yeah.
I cried then too.
I'm
I
sure you
did.
did.
I'm like, I am serious. Like there was like 6 or 7 moments, and I don't know what's going on again, but like
Jim, this is
he
the
goes in.
soft Jim Groom I wish I knew a decade ago. He was just all piss and vinegar and
Telling you,
the
something happened.
man.
But I mean, it's so brilliantly. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. I don't know if it's the story. I don't know if it's the acting. If it's combinations of both at various points. But like, it really is. I mean, seeing this as a parent now with
Yeah.
kids very
Mhm.
similar ages, it strikes me deeply. This idea of loss and the sins of your own, like your decisions, what you did, moves you made, places you went, and how that changed your kids' lives, and like what your role is in whatever they do, and to what responsibility do you really take on or not, and all these things that just haunt yourself as a parent. Like this movie in many ways is as much about the haunting of the parents of
Yeah.
what they've done to their kids
Mhm.
as the kind of hope that River Phoenix or Michael will have a new start
Yeah.
and like be able to do it. Like it's a very and on top of that, if you start paralleling the political ideologies and the idea of like what is truly right and where have we lost our way as a culture, it's a film saying a lot without any of the kind of like bullshit, you know lame ideologies laid on top of it. In fact, Artie's ideologies, pretty much everyone kind of sees through them. Like the kid, River Phoenix to me says like, "You're full of shit, Dad."
Yeah, he
Like
does.
that's what he
And
says to him.
there is this kind of final conversation between I mean, not the like goodbye conversation, but the final conversation where he implores Artie, yeah, Danny implores Artie, I need to stay. And he's like, you can't do that to them. This is his mafia side coming out. It's like the unit must stay intact, family first, no matter what, no outsiders, they don't matter. But I think also this idea that I think that you're expressing is emblematic of the final conversation also between Artie and Annie in the truck, where she admits that she went to see her father and what she's done. And you, it does make me think of like, you as a parent are making these choices. You've spent the most time you're going to spend with your children. It's already happened,
It's happened.
right?
Yeah.
It's already happened for both of us. Like, the most time we get to spend with our kids is my son's in college, my daughter's about to go to college, and that's what that conversation is. Even though it is, there's this whole layer of politics on top of it in the 60s and whatnot, but that's actually what the conversation is about. And the Artie character said, "We've made them great kids. Do you see how wonderful they are? They're flourishing, they're beautiful." And she's like, "Yeah, but they've grown up,
Yeah.
and this is like,
Exactly.
it's not your unit anymore. He's his own person. And this is the thing we do as parents. It's like, holy shit, that's true."
All families break up is what
Yeah,
Martha Plimpton's character Lorna says, and
exactly.
it's
It's true.
one of the many great lines in this
Yeah.
movie
Mhm.
that are the reality, right? Like, I have a huge family of 7, where my brothers and sisters are all over the globe, and if we ever get the chance to see each other, um, it's going to happen once every what, 5, 10 years,
Yeah, isn't that
maybe.
wild?
And then there'll be fucking funerals, right? Like, like that's the way the shit goes after
Yeah.
a point. And so
Mhm.
maybe it's just because it's in that very sweet spot as a family where you're still all together, even though now, as Christine Lottie or Annie doesn't want to, you don't really want to think about what's just over that hill.
Yeah.
And yet this family is now dealing with that. And they're dealing with it in a very specific context, but still.
I'm giving you your exit. Don't stop, Jim. You gotta come right into the exit. This is what I'm trying to guess exits here with this music. Here, wait, let's do it again. Let's do it
You're
again.
talking over the music, and the music is like fighting with you, and you sound like you're underwater.
No, you have no, that's the funny thing. It doesn't actually do that. I learned that too. So I sound underwater with the music on. You sound underwater, but when it's actually recording, it's not. It's an exit. We're learning, people.
Why
I'm
are you
so sorry.
exiting? I'm still talking.
I
You're just
know, but
exiting
you
me.
sound like you're coming to the end. It's me trying to guess
I
an
had a
ending to
good
the
ending.
podcast.
It was happening, and it was.
I
great
know,
with
and
the
that's why I
music,
was
but then
leading you into
you started
it.
talking, and you sounded like underwater. So I got
I didn't
scared.
talk.
Is
I
Michael
played
drowning?
music.
What's
Jesus.
happening?
All
Is
right,
he on the
take two.
run? Is
Take
he
two, everyone.
truly? Maybe he's a terrorist.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Here comes the exit music, Jim. Ready? Or do you want to lead in with your?
I don't know what to say. I'm done. I don't have an argument. I already said it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was
I
trying
sound like Woody Allen.
Okay, everybody.
I'm playing my best New York Jew here.
Yeah, you are. As an Irish Catholic. Thanks, everybody.
Italian Americans.